So this talk is about a couple of innovative things we've done with ObservePoint, just to give you some ideas, I guess, things you could take away and maybe act on, or God forbid, pay me and I'll do them for you. So I'll go through a few different things, but this is me, so I'm not going to do any more of the intro because Sarah did a fantastic job, so I'll just blast into. So Loop Horizon, that's the company I work for. A lot of us are ex-client side, so I was working at Sky up until about 4 and a bit years ago, and then moved over to Loop, moved over to agency side. We try and be the translation layer, so to help convert business requirements into technical requirements and vice versa. So this, we've got business practitioners and technical people, probably more like myself, and then I got given this by our marketing team, so we accelerate value. And what I mean by that is we're not just strategists, so we'll actually put the stuff into place. We can build and deploy as well. Anyway, enough about us. So what to expect from this? It's using ObservePoint to solve business problems. So it's really good follow-on from Steve's talk. I think, because it's going to go into a few examples of exactly what Steve was talking about, which is deliver value, solve problems, and quantify what problem you've solved. And I've got 3 examples. So there's one for compliance, one for data quality, and one where we drive efficiency. And these are real examples, but it won't be real data. So Xcode compliance dashboard, Power BI, blah, 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 blah. Also known as I've got 200 websites, how do I know if I'm compliant? Because I'm getting it in the neck from C-suite. So they want to know if we're compliant across our 200 websites. And by the way, they're going to cut funding if we can't tell them. I'm getting it in the neck from legal, because they need to have a compliance plan. They need to be able to show the regulator, should they ever be asked, that we're working towards compliance. And I'm getting in the neck from marketing, because they want to know if they can use the data that they've actually got access to. So this is the impossible dream. We've got 200 websites. We're going to benchmark it against compliance standards. We're going to collate that data. We're going to visualize it as a global view. But in order to meet all of those requirements that we have, we don't just need the global view. We need to drill down, have the ability to drill down into a granular level. And we need to be able to action the data. So let's dig into it. So firstly, and a couple of people have already spoken about this. We saw a demonstration of setting up consent standards this morning. So I'm going to set up some consent standards. I'm going to bring in the consent standards from the consent platform, and I'm going to build them out in ObservePoint. So what tags and what cookies can be set in different consent states: pre-consent, post-decline, post-accept. I've accepted only analytics but not advertising. I've accepted advertising but not analytics. Bring all of those in. And by the way, again, you've seen it earlier, but if you've got OneTrust, you're in luck because you can import them automatically. Fantastic. This wasn't OneTrust. This example actually was TrustArc, I believe. So we had to bring in the tags and cookies manually, and you can see there that's how you set it up. You bring those tags and cookies in. Then you apply your consents to your audit. So here we're in a pre-consent state, so we're only going to accept required cookies. We're not going to accept advertising and functional cookies. And then by the end of it, all being well, you're completely compliant, happy days, all 200 websites are fantastic, everyone can go home. It's not quite like that, but this one was. This one was compliant, thankfully. And in the end, you get something like this. So this is the compliance dashboard that we pulled together. It's in Power BI. And you can see you've got your measures there. So cookie compliance, really simple. Was the cookie that was seen expected based on the consent group that we set up? Was the tag that we saw expected based on the consent group? And then this one, probably the most important, is scan success. So again, what do you want to do if you can't get through consent? What we wanted to do, we wanted the scan to fail. If the scan fails, it means that one of your websites isn't even following your standards to the extent that we can even get past the consent management platform. So that's almost what you target first. And then, as well as those global numbers, you can have your drill downs. So we've got consent type, market, and domain. This allows you to break it down and drill down to individual websites. And that's what makes it actionable, because this is data from, in this case, it was 829 audits. This is fake data. The real one was 1,035 audits, and it was bringing all of that data together and pulling it into this dashboard, but with the ability to drill down. And to make that a little bit easier, we broke it down for the client by market. And so here you can see compliance rates by market, and the little blue line at the bottom is the number of domains within each market, so you can know which ones to target first, and then you can go into ObservePoint itself, and you can find the unapproved tag. You can find the unapproved cookie. Then you can contact the development team, or you can go into Google Tag Manager and you can fix it. Or if it transpires that the cookie should have been in that consent group all along, you can add it, pressing the little plus button. And I think we might have sound, I don't know, let's see. Is it gonna do it? I did a really cheesy little Muzak kind of overlay. I went and found I Googled lift music. It doesn't quite cut it without the lift music, unfortunately. Anyway, I'll go past that, but you can see basically that's what it looks like. Now it's going to go on to the next slide. No, it just keeps pausing.
You have to hum it instead.
Well, let me just, I don't know. There we go. Get it towards the end. No, it literally won't go past this slide. Next slide. There we go, finally. So one massive advantage that ObservePoint has is it's API driven. And when I found out about that, I thought, well, this is good news, because I can get everything I need out of the API. So what we did is we set up those audits, and we worked with ObservePoint's technical team. So we set up 5 archetype audits, one for each consent state, pre, post, analytics, etc., etc. Then we worked with ObservePoint's technical team, and they rolled those 5 archetypes out across 207 websites for us. Once that was done, built a Python script. So let's get into it. So that's the audits. Then built a Python script, hit the API endpoint 1,035 times, pull all the data together into a data table, and then visualize it in Power BI. Okay, great. And so that means that C-suite's happy. They've got their global compliance dashboard. Legal has a compliance roadmap, because they can demonstrate to the regulator that they're moving towards compliance. And marketing can understand all of the data and understand that they're allowed to use it. So that was the first example. So hopefully that's giving you some ideas about how you could use ObservePoint for compliance in your organization. Then this one's data quality consistency, also known as, I've got 1,000 websites, how am I confident that my tools are deployed correctly? Again, you're not going to be able to do that manually. It's something that Steve mentioned. It's completely impossible, so you're going to need some way of automating it. So here's the situation. We've got 1,000 websites and 1,000 instances of Google Tag Manager for some reason. We want to roll out one tag, and we want to roll it out 1,000 times. In this instance, it was GA4. We just want a standard version of GA4, and we just want to roll it out everywhere. But we need to be confident that we're going to be able to put that live once we roll it out 1,000 times, and we don't want to manually validate every single website to make sure that nothing's broken by doing this GA4 rollout. Because we want to benchmark that it's been consistently deployed, and then we want to activate it. That's what the client was wanted to do. So again, with my nice little moving GIFs, this is the setup for getting GA4 out. But essentially, you've got your tag script, your trigger script, and variables, and so on, the different components that would go into firing GA4, and you can get those out as JSON. Then you've got a list of domains that you want to deploy to. You've got a Python script, and you are going to push that through the GTM API to Google Tag Manager. And what you're going to do is, I mean, it was a little bit more complicated than this, because what you're going to do is you're going to push it to the development instance of Google Tag Manager. So if GTM for certain websites doesn't have a development instance, you're first going to have to create one and then push push the GA4 tag. But I didn't want to go into too much detail on the diagram. And then you're going to use a fantastic feature that's been demonstrated a couple of times today, been shown a couple of times today, which you're going to use file substitution. So you're going to configure an audit, and it's going to hit every single domain in your list. In that audit, you're going to disable the production Google Tag Manager script, and you're going to replace it with your development script, and you're going to do that in an automated way, and I'll show you how in a minute. And then you're going to set up some rules. In this case, nice and simple. Did GTM get deployed? In reality, you'd probably check that it doesn't fire pre-consent, and you'd make sure that the data that you wanted to go in was going in, and so on and so forth. But in this instance, this example, we're just going to check that the right version of GA4 has gone in. So that's the bit in the ObservePoint setup where you can drop your domains in. And we saw as well, again, Eve demonstrated earlier, that you can set it to only run across starting URLs. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to check the home page, or maybe 5 or 6 pages if I wanted to, just from a list of each of these 1,000 websites that I want to roll out to. This is then my file substitution. So you can see here that ObservePoint lets me write a regex. So this is going to look for GTM. But the key thing with this, I'll sort of poke at it, is that one, because the development instance of GTM has extra information on the end of the string. So if you tell it to look for, with the $, so a string that ends, a GTM string that ends without all of the extra information, then it will only replace the production instance of GTM, not the dev one that you're then going to add. Otherwise you end up blocking the instance of GTM that you've added. You set it to an empty JS object to block GTM in this case. And then you apply the file substitution to your audit. And then you add some JavaScript. So I'm going to open that up a bit. So all this is doing is I've created a JSON lookup object at the top. And you see there's 2 websites in here. In reality, there'd be about 1,000 of them. And then it's going to look that up using the web domain, the website you're on. And that's how it's going to dynamically replace the script. So then that's looking up location href, it's looking up the domain. And then this is, you can see there, those 2, is where it's replacing the string at the end of the GTM URL, and it's replacing the GTM ID. And so it's just going to run through all of those, replace GTM on every single page with the dev instance, and you're going to set up a rule, basically to say, in this case, nice simple rule, is it the right version of GA4 that's there? And then this didn't happen, but I'm just demonstrating that if it didn't work, you'd end up with a bunch of errors and the rule would fail, and that's, you'd be able to validate it and go figure out why it hadn't worked and then run it again and fix it. But that's the idea behind it. And then on my one that I created for the purpose of this this presentation, I got my development GTM script to fire a console error, and then ObservePoint picks up console errors, so then I could go into the audit and say, OP script replacement works, hooray. So it does work because I've tested it. So then the client got a global tool rollout. They were able to validate that global tool rollout for consistency at scale, which gave them the confidence to go live at scale that they wouldn't have been able to do without using ObservePoint as part of that process for their validation. Cool. So this one's around development process efficiency. And I think I probably will have a bit of time for questions at the end because I feel like I'm rattling through these. When I timed myself, it was coming about 34, 35 minutes, which I thought was about right, but I think I'm probably getting through it too quickly. But this one is, I have a data layer, how do I ensure it's developed consistently across all of my web properties? Common problem, I think a couple of people are nodding, that this is something that's a bit problematic. So here's the situation. We've got a really complex data layer for a retailer. We've built for that retailer schema validation, real-time schema validation. So when the developers are building parts of the website, it will return JavaScript errors to tell them if they haven't met the data layer schema. So that's already built. The problem is that that will only validate that they've built the schema correctly for the journey that they are building. But a data layer is an ecosystem that runs across the entire site, and having it fixed on one journey that you build doesn't mean that you haven't broken it somewhere else. So how would you validate, how would you run that schema validation at scale across your entire website? You'd use ObservePoint, funnily enough. And then we're going to automate it to trigger every single time the website goes live. And we're going to send alerts to say if the data hasn't been met. Oh, what have I done? Okay, good. Is that me, or is that something else?
Only someone opened up the microphone somewhere.
Okay. So this is the data layer, and it's one chunky data layer. It's 157 kilobytes. This is the scale of the issue. Should it be that big? No, it probably shouldn't. But the client's in a situation where they're feeding a lot of client-side tags. They haven't been able to move server-side yet, and so that data's got to come down and it's got to be available. Everything that's in there is stuff that they want because they're heavily monitoring their products and services and what have you. But yeah, it should probably be a bit smaller, but it isn't, so we're dealing with the situation that we've got. And then this is the JSON schema. So that's what a JSON schema looks like. So rather than validating your website against your data layer against like an Excel spreadsheet or whatever, put it in a format that can be used. It's not that hard. I figured it out. So you essentially define what all of the different objects should be within the schema. So you can see it's got one there that's supposed to be an array. If it's not an array, it fails. We've got one here. We've got some enums with required values. If it's missing one of those required values, then the schema fails, and it will return a JavaScript error to the developer console. And then that's what the error looks like. So this is what you get back in the console. It will return the error, and it will tell you that not only is the data layer not met the schema, but it'll tell you why. And in this case, you need a value that's equal to one of the values in this list, and you've added a value that isn't one of the values in that list. And by the way, if you want to know why that matters, it's because we've got filters built on this, we've got categorizations built on this, so you start adding in new values, and those filters and categorizations break, and reporting breaks, and we lose lots of money, and everybody gets fired. So it's really important that you keep the values accurate. And so it's not going to tell you all the bit about getting fired, but it will tell you that you've got to make it one of the values that's in the list. But how are we going to validate that against the entire website? And that's where ObservePoint comes in, because you can do file swapping again. You can swap the tag manager for a different version. So what we did is we don't want to run data layer schema validation in production. We don't want loads of JavaScript errors coming back for customers just because the data layer is not set up correctly. But in development, we do. And so we can set up a tag manager to host that data layer schema validation, and then we can swap the production tag manager to that version, and then we can pick up all of the feedback that we get back from in ObservePoint. We can pick up all the console errors. And then we can set rules to alert us when things are broken. And then, in the end, if we really want to, we can run a webhook. So every time the website's released, it will trigger that audit. So you just work with your development team, and basically they'll fire the API, and it will run the audit every single time the website's released. We didn't actually do that for this client. We instead just ran it at a cadence that matched their development cycle. So the developers release every 2 weeks. We just audit every 2 weeks. So that was potentially an easier option, but you can automate it if you want. That's the script. The bit that you're interested in is the AJV 8.16. That's the library. You can Google that. It's an open source JSON schema validator. And then the script below is the thing that's going to pass every single data layer object to the schema in order to validate against it. But the one at the top is the Cloudflare one that you can download and use. That's available for anyone. And And basically, you give your schema, the one that I was showing you earlier, and you pass it to that library, and then every time a data layer object is pushed, you send it to be validated, basically. I'll just let a couple of people taking photos. What it's then going to do, I'll sort of come out here because it's a little bit small, but you're going to assign an object back to the window, that's that line, and you're going to fire a console error. And the reason that I'm assigning an object back to the window is ObservePoint also gives you the ability to treat things that aren't tags as tags. So you can set up a subfolder, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute, where this one here, which is called OP data layer schema errors, that gets picked up as an object on the page and gets treated as a tag, and then you can validate it just like any other tag. And you can look at the data that's in it and break it down, because looking at console errors isn't too great. So the first thing is this was Adobe Launch. It's easier to swap versions of Adobe Launch than it is GTM, because it's just a single URL, whereas GTM's got all the rest of the JavaScript, so that's why I had to go through that faff of re-adding it back in on page load. Launch is nice and easy. You just replace whatever version of Launch you find with the development version instead, the one that's going to run the schema validation. And then you can tell I really like these moving objects. So I found a GIF recorder. So I sort of set these up in Draw.io, and then got this little GIF recorder that you can get, and so I sort of did a little video. So you've got your data layer object. So this is all running. This is ObservePoint running at over 1,000 pages. So this is going to validate every journey that we've got. And now across that journey, you've got the data layer object, which pushes onto a web page, which gets picked up by the tag manager, which is the version of the tag manager that has schema validation in it. That data layer object gets passed to the schema validation, which fires a bunch of errors because the data layer is wrong, bad, and sends them back to the web page, whereupon they will be picked up by ObservePoint and form part of your audit. And so that's what you get. Look, there you go. And this is the real one, hence why I've blurred it out, because I don't want to give away who it is. But yeah, 879 of the 1,000 pages that we scanned had data layer schema errors. And to Steve's point, you want to look at the value of that. That was one of their key data points that they used for understanding product performance, was the one that was broken. And what it was doing was it was adding an extra value in, so just as simple as it was a value that was outside of the agreed list, which meant that any filtering, any reporting, any segments, any categorization that they had built on the back of that would miss this data for these products. And you wouldn't see it because it would be mixed in with all of the other data, and it wouldn't be, it's just a bit, a few of the products would go missing, so how would you possibly notice? But ObservePoint can notice. Now, that wasn't very readable, trying to read it in those console errors, so it's great that you've got the console error, but it's quite difficult to dig into why the errors occurred. You saw there was a little scroll bar, and you have to scroll along. So this is why I turned it into a tag. So this is the subfolder. I think subfolders is a bit of a misleading name, by the way, guys. I think we should call it something else, but because it's not really what it does, but kind of. But you set up tags that will work within that subfolder. So you can see I've added a bunch of ones. This is a tag called Bambuser. When we've got the event-driven data layer, we turn it into a static object as well. So that's data layer computed. But you can see I've put in OP data layer schema errors, the one that we were writing to the page. So if we move on to the next bit, there, I've done a callback, so we don't have to remember it. It's there's the evidence right there. And what that means is you can then treat it like any other tag. So you can see here I'm looking in my tags on one of the pages that has a failed data layer, and OP data layer schema errors is the tag, and I can now drop it down and basically explode it out to its individual values, and I can see exactly why that error has occurred. And so then I can raise a Jira ticket and just get that straight into the dev team, and they can fix it. And I can then rescan it and check that it's been fixed. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a rule so that I'm going to get an alert when this fails. The rule's a bit backwards because normally you'd set a rule up for when a tag is missing. This one I'm setting the rule up for when the tag is present. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter it so that the rule only runs when the tag is present, and then I'm going to set a value that can't possibly ever be true. So the object that's going to be returned by my schema validation script is going to be a value of break. That will never be true. The rule will always fail. Therefore, if it finds schema validation errors and runs, you will always get a notification. Oh yeah, like put boxes around them and everything. It was very thorough. And so then what you can see here is these are the results you get, because you can now look at rule failures within ObservePoint, and you can see that's when they broke it. It was about 3 weeks ago. And they still haven't fixed it. This scan's run multiple times since. It hasn't been fixed yet, but that's just down to development cycles. It's going to take them a couple of months. And then the last thing is you could, if you wanted to, that's the API call that would run the audit automatically. So you can run that if you want. You could give that to your development team and say every time there's a push to production, run this API call and we'll audit that the data layer hasn't been broken. Or alternatively, you can just run it at a cadence that aligns to your dev schedule, which is what we did. We just ran it every 2 weeks. The next step for this particular client is to get ObservePoint's IPs whitelisted and to run it in staging. And so now, rather than retroactively finding issues with the data layer once they've been released, we'll find them before they get released, but one step at a time. So this was checking how production was doing. And so now we've got automated data layer validation, which we always had, but now we've got it at scale. We can run it across the entire website. We can be proactive with issue identification and resolution to the extent that if we want, the next step will be bring it into the development environments and be extra proactive and solve the problems before they even go live. That's the dream. And we've improved developer efficiency, because rather than the development teams pushing things live that are broken and then having to go back and fix them, which is very inefficient and costs a lot of money, they can fix them before they go live. And you've improved data quality because you're going to catch those issues before they go into production, and so you're not going to get broken data. And then we basically do managed services. So there's a managed services starter pack. So if you wanted to come and do this for you, come and have a chat to me. I won't go through that list. It's the sales bit. And there's me again, which is to say it's finished. Thank you very much.
We do have a few minutes for questions. So if you have questions for Matt or questions for Steve, because we didn't have time right after that. Does anybody have questions that they want to ask right now?
I've got a quick question for Matt. So really interesting, Matt. Is there a way that ObservePoint can help you rank which of your data layer schema issues are the ones that you need to focus on first if you've got such a large volume of issues?
Well, that was... So it wasn't 870 issues, it was just 870 pages. So as we went through them, it was the same issue replicated multiple times. In terms of ranking them, potentially you could bake it into your schema, because you saw it returned values from the schema as it validated. If you have particular areas within your schema that are extra important, you could put that into the schema validation script so that it returns it, and then ObservePoint will pick that up. So yeah, potentially.